All right, welcome to
Cool.
Philosophy Pod. How are you doing, boys?
Doing all right.
Pretty good.
Oh, and I meant to tell you, Ben, I'm drinking that scotch you got me for my birthday.
Oh, nice. Okay.
These really nice, like cotton tumblers that my mother-in-law got me. Look at that.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. How is
Um,
it? Is it tasty?
It's very tasty. Yes. I
Excellent.
just wish I was smoking a pipe, but unfortunately, it's a little too cold to sit outside.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so yeah, talking about Works of Love by Søren Kierkegaard, chapters. What was it?
I think it was
2B and
2.
2C, correct? Yeah. I got through most of the reading. If I have to admit, I was kind of cramming last minute, and I have like, I don't know, 15 pages left, 10 or 15 pages left of 2C. Did you guys get through the reading?
I did. I was also cramming last minute, and I finished 2C right before logging on here.
Okay.
Good.
I was like grabbing a beer, but also finishing the last paragraph.
The truth comes out.
Yeah, but I did finish it, but it has been now a while since I read 2B, so I have to brush up on my notes on that.
I did honestly like the exact opposite. I got through this maybe a month and a half ago, and then I put it down. I never returned to it. So like 2 days ago, I went back hoping I left notes in the margins that would cue me into what was going on. And my notes, it turns out, are mostly marking where I think he should have put a paragraph break in the middle of a 3-page ramble, and then a bunch of question marks. So
There are
unhelpful marginalia this time.
Yeah, you're essentially editing Kierkegaard.
There's some
Yeah,
long
right.
paragraphs in there for sure.
They are, man. I really like. A part of me wants to go through this and like type out the book myself and just make it grammatically the way that suits my eye.
Yeah. It's hefty.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Okay, well, I made a pretty good job of marking up 2B. Ben, you might have to help carry us home.
Okay.
The last chapter.
I can't actually find any notes on 2B. I might have just read through it and not taken notes.
Okay.
So,
all right.
But I've got plenty of notes on 2C.
There you go. Perfect. Perfect.
So with our powers combined, I think we can get through this.
Okay. Yeah, so 2B, you shall love your neighbor. Emphasis on neighbor. Right. So let's see if I can summarize. So it's Christian love that emphasizes love of one's neighbor. I mean, one's neighbor essentially being everyone and all people, over preferential love, which he describes as erotic love that is described by the poets, erotic love and friendship, essentially. So he's contrasting, Christian love of neighbor over this preferential love, Christian love being eternal. So having this quality of equality, and then selfish love being selfish. I mean, preferential love, like erotic love and friendship being selfish, essentially. I mean, that seems to be essentially what he's setting up, and then he's kind of, unpacking that throughout the chapter. Yeah, I mean, after that, any kind of like broad thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I was reading Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls about a month and a half ago when I was also reading this book and taking notes on it. And he opens the book like on the the cover page, like right at the start. It's not even the book yet. He opens it with a poem, and the poem I thought gave a really beautiful and succinct illustration of the distinction between neighborly love and poetic love, or friendship, or a love based on distinction rather than an unqualified love based on the fact that we share existence. And I'm down on my bookshelf and I don't know where I put it, so I can't read the poem. But I'm pretty sure I sent a photo of it to you, Luke. I mean, this is months ago. Like, I think I had just gotten to Phoenix. Oh man, I think it's in the group, not the group chat, like text message.
No,
I think it might be in group me.
Yeah, I think he texted me. I think it's just a text.
Oh man. Oh, I've been hanging on to that book for so long too, leaving it out. Like just leaving it in places and picking up like, oh, this can't be here, but I can't put it away. What do I do with it? And now it's lost.
Yeah, I can't pull it up, man.
All right, hang on.
I remember
you
sending me that quote.
My phone.
Okay, well, Yeah, I'll let you.
Yeah, I'll see if
Let
I
you
can
look
find it
that
real
up.
quick.
Yeah, so some parts that I underlined just like in the first few pages. So Christianity has thrust erotic love and friendship from the throne. The love rooted in mood and inclination, preferential love, in order to establish spiritual love in its place. Love to one's neighbor, a love which, in all earnestness and truth, is inwardly more tender. In the union of two persons than erotic love is, and more faithful in the sincerity of close friendship than the most famous friendship. So, I mean, that I feel like this is Kierkegaard. He kind of sets up a premise and he just approaches it from different angles, you know.
Yeah.
What page was that on?
That was just on 58, just kind of halfway through that first
Hmm.
paragraph. But I love his imagery of Christianity thrusting erotic love and friendship from the throne.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because he's really setting up how, you know, the pagan poets, you know, they made a virtue of erotic love, kind of idolized erotic love and friendship.
Mhm.
And then I just imagined Christianity coming on the scene and, you know, kind of toppling that idol, you know?
Yeah, that's
Uh,
a good image.
You know,
yeah.
I get when you described that, I got a like a Tower of Babel analogy in my mind. Like the pagans sort of thrust up this false virtue, which, I mean, it feels like love. It's a very intense, it's very passionate, it's very consuming, it's very making, you know, would make you willing to sacrifice. Like it kind of puts you in all of the right places, but you can only build it so far before it just fails and it topples. And so I kind of got that, but just as you were describing it, that image came to me. But I found the quote, the poem, if you guys want to hear it real quick.
Oh, great. Yeah, please
Yeah,
read
go
it.
for it.
Yeah, so it's by John Donne. I don't know who that is. Maybe you guys do. Maybe someone out there listening knows. Break the fourth wall. All right, so it goes, no man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less. As well as if I don't know what this word is, promontory. Right, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. And I feel like that absolute, and remember, this is opening a book about war, wherein the sharpest distinctions are drawn between friends and enemies. So he opens this book with this quote about how, you know, any loss of human life is, you know, as equally devastating to the entirety of humankind as it is to any one family, you know, anyone in a relationship, anyone, anywhere. And so I feel like I guess it's not a poem. I thought it was. It's just, I guess, a passage. But this passage, I feel like, is doing a good job at illustrating what Kierkegaard wants you to see in everybody and sort of how he wants you to understand your relationship to everybody. Is that it's a very universal thing, no distinctions. So that, you know, this guy, he never, when he hears the bell toll at the church marking a funeral, he never sends to see who it is. He knows who it is. It's my neighbor. You know, what more do you really need to know? And by the passage, it makes me feel like there's a grief associated with this sort of realization that if a single stone washed into the ocean, Europe is less. Not Italy, not France, fucking Europe. I mean, you could probably push that farther, because if you're drawing Europe, there's a distinction now between not Europe. So, I mean, really, you could enhance that farther, which is probably, and it's probably more like what Kierkegaard wants, like zero distinctions.
Yeah.
And then in a book about war, I feel like the poetic love there is that, you know, what do the Spaniards in this book feel for each other? I mean, in intensely passionate loyalty, like they're dying for each other every single day, lots of sacrifice. But are they mourning for the death of the fascists the same way? Absolutely not. They party when they die. So
Right.
there's the sharpest distinction being drawn and the sharpest contrast between the response of the individuals in the book to the death of the people around them that the opening quote says is absolutely wrong. I mean, Hemingway does this crazy thing with contrast there where he tells you this one thing, then writes an entire book about just like the opposite. So I feel like the book itself is drawing you towards this poetic love or this understanding of love based on distinctions. And then the opening passage is illustrating how ultimately there are no distinctions. You know, if one stone washed away from Europe, all of Europe is lesser. You know, if one death and one war occurs, all of humankind is lesser. Some possibilities have been lost. Some potential for advancement has been lost. And I think Kierkegaard, I think given his extremely religious background, would see the death of any one person as the death of a nation, sort of the way a Jew would, that Abraham is the father of nations. If he had died, you know, the stars of the sky all die with him. You know, the innumerable grains of sand, they all go away too. So I think Kierkegaard wants to push this idea in the passage to really like its highest level, like really understanding that the death of anyone is a tragedy for everyone. And you have to see that in everybody you meet and treat them as if their life were precious. And I'm out of thoughts.
Absolutely, man.
No,
that
that's
was great. That was great. And I mean, I was just thinking about, you know, so the end of that reading, For Whom the Bell Tolls. There's something about the quality of Kierkegaard's love, his love of neighbor, which is like it's like a bell, it's like a sounding gong. To me, he's expressing a love, a love that does not discern, does not play favorites, a love that's not preferential, and it's just like it's like a bell. I mean, it's like the bell is the bell. Anyone hears the sound of the bell, you know. The bell tolls. Anyone can hear it. To me, Kierkegaard is calling us to love in a way that our love is our love, and our love is manifest to, you know, whomever we encounter. You know, it has that quality. Does that make sense? It's like it's true in that way that, you know, a bell ringing is true. It's idealistic. It's it almost feels like an impossible standard, but I mean, it's beautiful at the same time.
Yeah,
I think that might be something that comes up again. Is I don't know for sure. I didn't really read the entire book as an undergraduate. You read like selected chapters, and I don't remember it ever coming up. But I'd be curious because Kierkegaard is very interested in using paradox to sort of lead you somewhere and then just disrupt sort of everything you thought you were understanding. Like he really, I think I mentioned this in the last one we did, me and Luke, so that he's very much responding to Hegel. And so he's almost being purposefully confusing as if to mock Hegel's. I mean, I think Hegel probably thinks he's being clear, but nobody else does. And I think Kierkegaard's kind of mocking that sometimes with the way he writes. And so I'd be curious to see if he brings up this idea of, I don't know, attempting to uphold an impossible standard and necessarily failing. It's an impossible standard. You fail necessarily. There is no other option. And so it's this, there's a sort of paradox in there of why should you bother? If you know at the start you're going to fail, why even try? And so I wonder if there's an undercurrent anywhere in this book sort of addressing why you should try. Like, yes, it's an impossible standard. Yes, it's idealistic, but what else are you going to do?
What else are you going to do?
I wonder if he's going to talk about that. Like, this is the world we live in. Love your neighbor like yourself. Period. So I'd be curious to see if we can find anything that sort of addresses that problem anywhere in the text.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but at the end of 2C, he says, true dedication, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, true dedication is to consequently give up all demands in order to understand what an enormous demand God and the eternal make upon one himself. He who will receive this understanding is ready to love his neighbor. So it's like the task is almost just to understand that it's important. Not you have to do this perfectly.
Right.
But he's recognizing there that it is an enormous demand. Like this is not an easy task. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if he expands on that more later in the book.
Yeah, can you say where that is? Because I'm going to mark it as well. Because that
That's
seems like something you might
on-
actually come back to if we follow this thread and then find it go somewhere. I want to be able to find that passage.
That's on page 98. It's the last paragraph of 2C.
About how far down? Halfway down page 98?
It's the
Like, what's the first word on
actually
the line? Not the first word of the
the
sentence,
letter
but the
O.
first word of the line. Oh.
It's right. It's the first sentence that starts on page 98.
Oh, true dedication, however.
Oh, true dedication. Yeah.
All right, perfect. I think I actually took the very next line and marked it for myself.
Oh.
Interesting.
Yeah, jumping back to 2B, there's a couple things that stood out to me. Was this where he introduces the concept of the other I?
Yes. Oh, that's so good. Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting.
Yes.
Just the idea that like it's a love that's directed towards another person and yet still selfish. Like it still kind of like circles back onto yourself because of that preference in it. I thought that was really great. I feel like it took me some time to really grasp what he was getting at there, and then once it clicked, it was like, oh, that's why it's a selfish form of love, even though it's directed towards another person. So that contrast between the other, is it the other you and the other I?
The other I, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Or he also calls it the other self.
Yeah. Yeah, one passage I underlined, so page 67, kind of halfway down that first paragraph. Now, to admire another person certainly is not self-love, but to be loved by the one and only object of admiration, must not this relationship turn back in a selfish way to the I which loves its other I? It is this way with friendship too. So yes, he does this brilliant, it's a brilliant turn where, gosh, and he does this great job. He really sets up these dichotomies, these two poles, like an antipole, where he essentially sets it up where, friendship, erotic love are a form of selfish love. And the only alternative to that is that unconditional love of neighbor, which has nothing to do with preference. Because when you think about it, and it's really insightful, preference, it turns back inwards towards I. I mean, it's I find this person attractive. I am attracted to this person. Or I like the company of this friend. There's something about, the quality of my relationship with this other that makes me feel valued, or I find enjoyment. It turns back on oneself. Absolutely. And so the only alternative is this non-preferential kind of universal love of neighbor, which I get it. But I think for me, the sticking point is always, being a husband and a father, there's something about ordered loves that also makes sense to me.
Yeah. He kind of touches on that in 2C, and I feel like he doesn't address it quite as fully as I'd like him to. Because he talks about how love of neighbor is the highest form of love. So he is ordering them. But he's saying neighborly love that's the highest. That's the best.
Or and eternal. Like he gives it eternal, that quality of eternal.
Yeah.
Which I'll grant him that. I will grant him that. There is something about love of family, love of children, which is, almost carnal in a way, fleshly,
Well, yeah, there was page 87. He said, if you stick together with certain other people who have a special position and special conditions in life, even if it is only with your wife, then worldliness tempts. And I was like, Oh man, that doesn't sound good for me. But yeah, I think that's really something that I was kind of wrestling with in this, because I mean, I've even like had conversations with my wife recently where it's like she wants me to like fight for her and, you know, protect her and things like that. So it's like demanding that preference and that, you know, more from this perspective, more selfish form of love. But like, is that also not what, like, is that really a bad thing? I guess if I can do that and also, yeah, I don't know, what's the right ordering? Which comes first, or which should I prioritize? I don't know. It's definitely making me wrestle with that.
So there's a line on page 87. It's towards the bottom. There are no paragraph breaks, so I don't know how to direct you any better than that. Let me see. The first word on the line of the page, so not the line of the sentence, but the line of the page, is evening. Above it is champion. Below it is that. All right, so the sentence is, yes, walking with God, but it's the part in parentheses that I underlined and I think is relevant to this. So he said at the end of that passage, or at the end of that sentence, he writes, at the end of the parenthetical, he writes, God is the middle term.
Mm-hmm.
How familiar are you guys with formal logic?
Not
At
very
all?
familiar.
No? Okay.
All
right.
He mentioned this middle term thing earlier in the book, and I
if you can find that might actually be really helpful here, because that's a very specific. That's not like a random word he threw in there for poetic effect. That's a technical term in logic.
Gotcha. I glossed over it.
That would be important to find
when I saw it before, and it was further back. I don't remember where it was in the book, but I do.
Well, it would be important. Missing one isn't a big deal. It'd be one of those things to keep an eye for moving forward, because if it is important, it'll be there a third time, and if it's not, then the two are he just happened to use it twice. So that's not a big deal. But all right, so this idea of a middle term comes out of the syllogism, and the syllogism is a argument form which has to do with the relationship between parts and a whole. So the go-to example is always, or the go-to example for an argument in syllogistic form is, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. So the middle term is what connects Socrates to morality in the conclusion. And that middle term is manhood. Probably not manliness, because I feel like that concept of manliness has more to do with, like, I don't know, strength, glory, honor, courage, virtue, but just like the fact of his being a man, his existence really is what connects him. Yeah.
Can I restate it? So it'd be A is B, B is C, therefore A is C.
Yeah. And syllogistic logic, it gets more complicated than that, I promise, but I can't really speak to it because I didn't get much farther than that.
Okay.
So, but that is in its basic form, just that's what the middle term is. It connects the part to the whole. So Socrates is a part of the group of existing things that are men, and men are a part of the group of things that, are mortal. So, Socrates is mortal because Socrates is a man, and man is the concept that connects the small concept of Socrates to the big concept of mortality. And so when he says God is the middle term, it has to be the middle term between two other concepts. And I think what I underlined this for, because I didn't put a question mark next to it, but when I look at it, I have absolutely no idea why I would have underlined it, other than to remind myself that I don't understand what he means by God is the middle term. I just, like, as you were speaking, I was looking at this, wondering, why did I underline this and make no mark or comment? And then it kind of, like, it hit me right there. I think it's God is the middle term that connects, so Socrates is almost a weird example of a concept, because it's a concept with one content, the man who is Socrates. Or human is a concept that has many, many contents. You, me, all of China, all of Europe, everything. So I think he's the middle term between, I guess you, me, any given person,
Mm-hmm.
and their neighbor, not between any other given person. So
Mm.
God isn't the middle term that connects me to you, but the middle term that connects me to this higher order entity that is my neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
And the content of the concept neighbor includes everybody,
Yeah.
as
Right.
does humanity. So I guess they would be analogous concepts in this case,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
as would sort of the concept of men, like all mankind, all men are
Right.
created equal. This concept of man just is there are no distinctions. All men are created equal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess neighbor would be an analogous concept to that of, all men in the case of being created equal, and, humanity.
Gotcha.
But to
Okay.
put
Yeah,
God
that
as
makes
the
sense.
middle term, like what a neighbor is, that we don't really need more analogous concepts for that. But to put God as the middle term there, one, I think definitely puts neighborly love higher order than, the other possible orders. I think that if God is the middle term between you and your neighbor, then that love is probably superior. What's the middle term between you
Yeah.
and your wife? Yeah, hopefully it's
My
something like a
preference.
neighbor, I guess. Yeah, preference.
Right.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
think that was going to fall below neighborly love.
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
But
Sorry,
to
Ari.
put God as
Right.
the middle term, I think that's a hell of a claim to make, because it's not just a proposition. Like what he's saying there isn't just speaking to what it is to be a neighbor. He's speaking to what it is to be God.
Yeah.
Yep. That's a much bigger and maybe more interesting claim, probably more open to error, just because it's so broad in scope. But so if you come across middle term anywhere, like keep tracking that, because if anywhere it's associated with God, we're gonna be following a thread in this book that is making much, much more radical claims than probably anything he put explicitly. Or might be making much, much more radical claims than anything he puts explicitly.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And I'm trying to find some passages that make that connection. I'm finding something that's related, but in my mind, Brian, what this is linking to is, again, Kierkegaard putting love of neighbor as with the eternal, and connecting that with, God being love. And so for us to love God is to love our neighbor. To participate in God's love is to love our neighbor. So it's this love on a higher plane, which is eternal, which is union with God, which is participating in God's love. And that exists unconditionally. So it's to me, it's taking us above these kind of earthly distinctions, like these political, familial distinctions, which he's not negating. He's not saying those are bad in and of themselves, but he's making a distinction, this eternal. He's kind of, you know what I mean? Describing an eternal plane, which is participating in God's love, and which is love of neighbor. So, I mean, a passage I found, which was on page 74, kind of like 2/3 of the way down, that line starts with compromise, but the sentence itself is, no, love your beloved faithfully and tenderly, but let love to your neighbor be the sanctifier in your covenant of union with God. Love your friend honestly and devotedly, but let love to your neighbor be what you learn from each other in the intimacy of friendship with God. Death erases all distinctions, but preference is always related to distinctions. Yet the way to life and to the eternal goes through death and through the extinction of distinctions. Therefore, only love to one's neighbor truly leads to life.
Yeah. That's good.
It's good.
Yeah.
Good. Man, yeah, Kierkegaard just has a way with words. And his connection, I thought that was beautiful. Death as being the extinction of distinction. And to me, that's related to, I kind of relate that to baptism, or, death of the flesh, like dying to the world is dying to, worldly distinction. And so it's kind of participating in the eternal. And I think that final death allows us to fully participate in the eternal.
Yeah.
But before then, let's say, after baptism, kind of, say, dying to flesh, being born again in the spirit is, for him, participating in that Christian love is a death in and of itself.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like there was he mentioned death again, and I thought I wrote it down, but I can't find it now. But it was he kind of echoed that same sentiment that it's only through death that we're able to actually, like, finally move actually beyond distinctions. That's a really good connection.
But it's honestly really fascinating discussing this chapter in Kierkegaard, on the heels of, was it J.D. Vance, mentioned Order Amoris, which is like the ordering of loves, which is a Catholic teaching from Aquinas.
Okay.
Anyway, and so this feels very, very relevant because I feel like there's a live political debate when it comes to, like, as a polity, as a political body, how should we order our affections, Anyway, and it just makes me wonder, like, where would Kierkegaard fall in all this,
Yeah.
He seems to be more on the kind of universal side of things. There's even a passage where he kind of spoke against Christendom. He said, okay, page 81, halfway through, and so-called Christendom, therefore, the distinction of earthly existence still continually tempt. Alas, very likely they more than tempt, so that one behaves arrogantly and another defiantly envies. So he's kind of, it's interesting. He doesn't have good words to say about Christendom.
I'm trying to remember, Brian, you gave us kind of an overview of the context he was writing this in when we started. And he was making some critique of Christendom as a whole and where it had landed. Like, was it like a cultural Christianity kind of situation? I'm blanking on, like,
yeah. It was almost like a superiority complex kind of Christianity. Like they were making sharp distinctions between themselves and other people, and there was this is my understanding of it anyway, that they were like self-righteous. They were virtue signaling their Christianity as a sign of their utmost virtue and goodness, and God forbid you not respond to those signals appropriately.
So this is pretty targeted then.
Yeah.
That's the context. He's like, love without distinction.
Like if you read this, you probably knew whether or not you were included in this attack, which is almost an ironic thing to do. Make an incredibly sharp distinction and absolutely condemn those on the other side of this distinction while simultaneously absolutely advocating the 100% necessity of upholding a love which rejects all distinctions. So here we go with more human paradoxes to be found in Kierkegaard.
Yeah.
And honestly, that I think I remember, God, I forgot that me and Ben, we did one, like our first group reading of this book, and you missed it. And then the second one was me and Luke over after I had moved to Phoenix, I think. And now we're number 3 and I'm in a third state.
Where are you going to be in 2 months, Brian?
Oh, God, I'm going to be right here. I'm never leaving again. This is where I went on one weird adventure away from home. It took a decade to circle back. Now I'm here. I'm not leaving again.
You're not leaving.
This is it. Yeah, but so that was the Christendom thing. I was going to make another comment. I forgot what it was. Did that answer your question? I think that was all I was going to say. Was that?
Yeah, that helped.
Yeah. There was another thing I was looking for in here too.
Yeah, and just while you're looking that up, I mean, just to kind of dig into it, it seems like, so this Catholic teaching of Ordo Amoris is kind of this idea of concentric circles, of love.
Okay.
And so I don't think it necessarily contradicts what Kierkegaard is saying, because what I think Kierkegaard is leading us towards is a love that expands, until our love kind of reaches beyond all borders and boundaries. But I think, Ordo Amoris is something of looking at spheres of responsibility of love, ordering our love. So, for example, if I'm, giving charitable donations to, starving children in, Ethiopia or whatever, but then I'm not even feeding my own kids at home, like that's disordered, right?
Right.
I think Kierkegaard would agree. So there is something to, with limited resources, limited time, there is something to an order of love. So I, like, Ben, kind of going back to your comment, loving your wife, that's how I see it. It's that Kierkegaard's not disagreeing. He's not, advocating neglecting our family,
Right.
but just that our love should not end, with those boundaries,
Yeah.
our love should expand beyond that. So that's how I take
mean,
it.
like that passage that you read, it was, what did it say? Love your wife faithfully, but then loving your neighbor is actually what is the higher. You want to expand beyond loving your wife faithfully, basically. Yeah.
So I want to,
Makes sense.
because there's a point he's making in here, and I feel like he makes it explicitly somewhere, but I don't remember where. But there's a point he makes in here somewhere that is preferential love and neighborly love are not mutually exclusive. Like, what makes neighborly love a higher order love is it doesn't exclude any of the possible preferential loves you could possibly have.
Yeah.
And so to love your wife, like to truly love your wife, wouldn't be to exclude the neighborly aspect of your wife. That would be a lower, lesser order love, probably in God's eye unworthy of a wife. They would be to love the whole of your wife, which would include the part of your wife that includes the middle term, that includes her in the category of neighbor. So it would be to include all of it, to include, I guess, God, which I think would circle back to why love of God is love of the neighbor. Love of the neighbor is the love of God. That you don't get one without the other, ever. It's not, like, it's conceptually not possible. The concept excludes that possibility.
Yes. So loving one's wife would be contained within loving one's neighbor, since that's what you're saying.
Yeah, like to love the neighbor is to love specifically your wife, which I guess would also mean if I loved my neighbor, I love your wife. So I guess
different kind of love, though.
a weird implication of that claim. But there you go. That's philosophy.
That's philosophy.
I did there. Neighborly love. If neighborly love is highest, that includes and supersedes my preferential love for my wife. So it's like it encompasses it.
Yeah.
It doesn't exclude it.
And real quick, concentric circles are circles contained within circles, not overlapping circles, right? Okay, good. Because at first I thought you meant like Venn diagram, kind of like overlapping circles. I was like trying to follow a chain of circles through the order of values. And then I realized, like, wait, concentric, I don't think it means that. Okay.
The nested.
Nested circles.
Logo of love.
What do you think? This is something I would have a question. I don't know if there's a answer in this book or in the something Amori, the Christian ranking of
Ordo Amoris.
Yeah. But it sounds like what that is trying to, like, instill in a person, maybe, like, a way. So if you found yourself in a situation where to accept one love is necessarily to sacrifice a different one, and to accept the different one is to necessarily sacrifice the first one. Like, if you were in that position, you get one and not the other, black and white. What do you choose? Like, which love do you side with? And that's in that specific context the higher order love. So if it's between my love of, I don't know, bourbon and my love of reading philosophy without a headache, like, do I go with the bourbon and, like, forget the headache? It'll make it worse, but whatever. like which one do I go with there? I would go in this case with not drinking the bourbon to aggravate the headache and taking a Tylenol instead. But like in this specific case, it's 1 versus 1. I guess my love of Tylenol superseded my love of bourbon. So then I guess if you're trying to find
I think you have to use kind of the caritas, like kind of charity definition of love here.
Okay, which I'm not familiar with that.
Which doesn't apply to bourbon.
That makes sense.
Or yeah, care. You can think about it, care for others, that kind of like loving care. So I think
so by
it's
others,
without it being personal.
Okay.
I think it would.
Is it strictly directed to a person? Like, is that like a
I think it has to fall. It has to fall into either neighborly love or that friendship or erotic love. Like those, the two categories that he's defined. In which case, there on page 76, he says, "Death itself cannot deprive you of your neighbor either, for if it takes one, life immediately gives you another. Death can deprive you of a friend, because in loving a friend, you really cling to your friend, but in loving your neighbor, you cling to God. Therefore, death cannot deprive you of your neighbor. If therefore you have lost everything of erotic love and friendship, if you have never had any of this happiness, in loving your neighbor, you still have the best left." So I feel like in that, like if you can categorize it into one of those two buckets, then if you had to pick between one, you'd pick whatever one falls in the neighborly love bucket, because the other ones you can lose through death.
Yeah, and just to expound upon, I heard a story about Leo Tolstoy, the author, that after his Christian conversion, he became kind of so infatuated with the idea of kind of like loving his neighbor, loving the peasant, that he bought an estate in the countryside and essentially opened his home to any Russian peasant that wanted to enter his home, and he wouldn't prevent them from taking things. So there would just be random people walking through his house, taking things, eating his food, and he had a wife and kids. And his family's like, what the heck? Like, this is terrible. Like random peasants are just walking into our house all the time. And I think, to me, that what Leo Tolstoy is embodying is a disordered love. This is contrary to the, traditional Catholic teaching, of Ordo Amoris, because he's neglecting the love and care of his wife and his kids for this idea, of loving the peasant, right?
Interesting.
Does that make sense, Brian? That's kind of the counterexample.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. That leads me probably a little bit off topic, but that sounds like that decision sounds like I'm assuming you've heard of, but have you read Les Misérables?
I haven't. No.
No. So the opening chapters, I think it's the opening book. I don't know. The book Les Mis is broken down to so many different subcategories, but like the first few chapters of the book describe. My understanding is that he's describing an ideal person, and his ideal person is I think he's a bishop somewhere in France, and this bishop never locks his door and will accept any guest into his home. And so part of what like starts the book off, the inciting incident, is the main character of the book, Jean Valjean, is the one who knocks on this bishop's door one night, and Jean Valjean is an escaped convict who robs from him. He goes in there and he steals beautiful silver candlesticks, and then he runs away with them, and then he robs like 50 cents from a little peasant boy, which is just a side detail more or less. But what happens is when he gets arrested, he gets brought back to the bishop, and the cops are like, he says, you gave him these candlesticks. That's absurd. This man is a felon, and these are silver. Like, here are your candlesticks. Tell us to convict him, and we'll send him back. And the bishop says, no, they were a gift. Send him on his way. And so it sounds like Tolstoy is like trying to embody in this choice to open his doors to everybody and anybody, this idea put forward in Les Misérables. And the reason I wanted to try to isolate the subcategory, and I couldn't remember the part of the book these chapters are in, are called An Upright Man. So he's describing to you an upright man, and his upright man who does everything properly and is, you know, like the ideal Christian who doesn't play into the games of the hierarchy he's in. He isn't trying to ascend it arbitrarily. He's happy where he is. He's doing good where he is. That almost like Tolstoy is trying to do that, only Tolstoy's version of it is not, it's not the upright version of the bishop in the book. Like it does sound like what you're describing is more of a, almost like a late 60s hippie attempt at just like throwing off everything and anything that can be thrown off for like this weird sort of misunderstood ideal that is love.
Yeah.
Like, I think that was literally what they were doing in the 60s. They had a weird ideal of love, and they threw everything to it, and it was way wrong.
Yeah.
I think Tolstoy was probably on a better path than them, but it seems like the motivation there is the same thing. To like, oh my God, I've discovered something wonderful. Let me just like make weird sacrifices for it that are actually problematic, not helpful in any way.
Oh, yeah. Like, take your kids to Woodstock while you get high.
Yeah.
Just wander around naked while you're having free love.
Yeah, exactly. That's more like, I don't think Tolstoy pushed it that far, but he's unfortunately in that category.
Yeah.
I think he's just like, he hadn't ascended the ladder of insanity quite so high, but he's on the same ladder.
Yeah. Yeah. Ben?
Yeah, towards the end of 2C, he talks about this idea of, he gives this illustration of a man throwing a feast for basically like the poor and cripples. And he's using it to illustrate like the friend who is like initially upset that he wasn't invited to the feast, and then once he finds out who was invited, then he's not upset anymore. But this idea of like, in contrast to what Tolstoy did, this was like, I'm putting on a feast and then I invite these people into my home for this feast. Like, it's an intentional bringing them in, as opposed to that disordered state where he's just like, my door's open, do whatever you want. It's like, no, come for a feast. There's an invitation, there's a purpose, and it's intentional.
Oh, so that's actually interesting too, because in Les Miserables, he is invited in to dinner. He isn't simply invited in and just like, all right, go about your business. I'm going to go sit down with my sister and have tea. It's like, he's invited in for this. Like, take off your shoes. I'll hang up your coat. Let me cook you something. We'll eat together. Like, we will share this for a moment and get to know each other. And I'm pretty sure in the middle of like that scene where he's asking questions. Who are you? What are you doing here? They're conversating, is when the invitation to stay the night occurs. So it actually is interesting because the bishop isn't blindly opening his door and then like turning a blind eye as if, nope, I'm not being robbed. Like, he's very aware of what he's doing. He knows the key to that silver is in the keyhole. He knows the felon is right there. You know, he knows the doors are open. I think that including that sort of like that idea of purpose to it is that you're not here arbitrarily, and I'm not just simply turning a blind eye to whatever you do because it's okay. I love you. It's, you know, there's a purpose there. I'm watching, I'm paying attention. I'm getting to know you in a way that, you know, moves beyond simply what you say to me. And I'm choosing to welcome you into my home and then to accept the consequences, whatever they may be. Not to just pretend like, nope, it's fine. They're peasants. They can steal from me. It's like, it's not fine. It's wrong. But I think that aspect of purpose changes sort of the ideal, the good version of this scenario and the Tolstoy 1960s unfortunate version of this scenario.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that the difference is, you know, in the case that you described, Les Miserables, the bishop, he's the one taking on the cost. Like, he's exposing himself. His love makes him vulnerable to theft. He's not exposing someone he loves to burglary. He's exposing himself to burglary, as opposed to the Tolstoy example, where he's creating a chaotic home environment for his wife and children. He's exposing his family, those within his care, to chaos.
So the thing that actually reminded me of Les Mis is he does live with his sister. So when he invites a felon in, it isn't simply him. There are other people sort of dependent on him and his livelihood to support them.
Well, why do you have to complicate it, Brian? I was trying to make it
such a clear picture. Yeah.
Come on. but you see what I mean, and I think to me this is related to this idea of a celibate priesthood, and to me it's connected with St. Paul's teaching, essentially more or less that for those who can be celibate, it's better to be celibate, because I think there's a way in which. And I think about Kierkegaard, the fact that he was never married, he was engaged, right? He called it off. So there's a way in which one can more easily take upon oneself the cost of this neighborly love. If one is free of those earthly attachments, if one doesn't have a wife, if one doesn't have kids to care for, one's not encumbered in a way. It's more simple. Like one can more easily participate in this neighborly love. Does that make sense? Without others specifically under one's care. And I think
Paul basically directly addresses that. He's like, it's harder if you're married.
Yeah.
Because you have a family to take care of.
Yeah. It's complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think it would be harder if you were married, or harder if you weren't married but wanted to be? Like if you were pursuing marriage, like you want that, you're looking for it, you're dating, you're going through all these motions, like you want it.
I think Paul would say,
like, what do you think?
Then you should get married.
Then you should. Okay.
But if you're okay with not being married, then stick with
so
that,
if you can both not have a family and not have the want of a family, then absolutely go the celibacy route.
I think so. Yeah.
But if that's not for you, it's okay. Go ahead.
Right. But then your focus. I mean, I can't remember exactly what he says, but he's basically like, if you have a family, then like you should focus on them, and that means that you can't focus as much on your neighbor, basically. I mean, because you've limited your scope, and it is more important to then take care of your family first with the ordered loves. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. I also just want to drop in real quick. I have to go in like 5 minutes. I figure I get to at least an hour with you guys, regardless of what the clock says, but we're winding down to the end for me.
Yeah. So, yeah, guys. Any final thoughts on 2C? Like any major themes that we didn't cover?
Honestly, I don't have anything personally, but again, I haven't read this in the last month and a half, so. Ben, if you do, I know you're probably more familiar with it, having finished it an hour ago.
Yeah, this was like right near the end of it. But I think this might have been the passage of about death that I was trying to find. Page 96. It's talking about how we carry our distinctions, and we should be carrying them loosely. It says, the individual grows misshaped. Every such individual is, in the view of the eternal, a cripple. Alas, in actuality, the individual grows simultaneously with his differences, so that death at last must use force to tear them from him. I thought that was really poignant. It's like we're kind of stuck with our differences, and we in fact grow with them, which makes it harder and harder to get away from them until basically death is like the mechanism by which we can finally be removed from our distinctions. And I was like, I mean, that goes to the idea that this neighborly love is the eternal. Like, it's the only way to fully get to that point is through death. We can be working towards it, but we will never perfectly achieve it until we pass through death, which tears these distinctions from us. And anyway, that was like that passage was like, I don't know, very graphic.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
It makes me think of like a symbiotic relationship between a
Yeah.
fish and a shark, and like they grow together. I mean, I don't know how much they really are necessarily dependent on each other, but like biologically, like they have grown together. Like their
Mhm.
environment necessarily or their proper environment necessarily includes the other one.
Or
And
even
that
like, I mean, even with these distinctions, it's almost like a parasite or something, where it's like,
oh, so you're
you
thinking
know,
it's like a bad symbiote, like not a
yeah,
symbiotic,
yeah,
with
yeah.
the
It's like
opposite
you,
symbiotic where it's fucking
it's
eating you, it's
right.
festering inside of you.
It's preventing me from achieving my full potential.
Yeah, it's like it's one of those
It's
stupid sorts of things which destroys the environment on which it depends and therefore kills
yeah,
itself because it just takes
it's
Yeah,
without
parasitic.
growing with
yeah,
me as
yeah,
as
parasite.
I grow. It's feeding off of me and growing as well.
That's
And
interesting
then
because I
yeah,
actually thought you're not wrong. That's what to me is interesting because I definitely was thinking more of like the healthy symbiotic relationship, not the one-sided sort of parasitic. And they both fit,
yeah, that
but
is
I
interesting.
think
But
I
in
was
this,
thinking of it as a like without the ability to live with these differences and distinctions, there is no love for your wife. And so
mm,
it's like there's assuming you are in a healthy relationship. I mean, not you specifically, but assuming a person's in a healthy relationship with their wife, then it seems like there's a symbiosis to it
mhm,
that he's trying to like make clear. I'm not like, he's not trying to tell you to fight against that. It's not only okay, it's appropriate that it
mm,
is like it is what you are most fitted for. It is your environment that you are appropriate inside of. Like if
mm,
you're in a different environment, you're not the appropriate thing for that place, and that place isn't the appropriate place for you. And when it's right, it's a healthy symbiotic thing. You grow with your differences. They're there necessarily. You can't be without them.
mhm.
And then yeah, you can go. I was just going to ramble a little bit
Well,
more.
just because the reality is civilization is utterly dependent on preferential love.
Oh
Mm,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
interesting.
like
Yeah,
there is no.
Reproduction, biological reproduction
yeah,
is
yeah.
dependent on preferential love. So it's almost the order of creation is one way, and Kierkegaard is describing an eternal order which is on a different plane.
Mm,
And there's a tension. There's a tension there.
yeah.
Because we are, biological creatures. And what he's describing is eternal, spiritual. In
Mhm.
some ways, the body must die for us to fully participate in that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that that makes sense because the ordered loves make sense in the temporal where we're at now. But then once you pass through death to the eternal, then there's that order is no longer really present. There's just neighborly love, and that's the highest. So, yeah,
It sounds like a solid place
that
to stop.
that ties it all together right there.
Yeah, I think it did. Like, all right, chapter
Awesome.
2B cracked wide open.
Boom.
Excellent.
Do you guys want to get 2C, or do you want to just sort of move on and whatever gets carried over, but no real attempt to include 2C in the next reading?
I was quoting 2C.
Yeah, no, I meant for next time. Because we had discussed like any final thoughts on 2C, but I think this is kind of the extent of what we discussed about it. So we kind of like we could just do it again. But I don't know. Do you guys want to just move on and let this sort of be what 2C gets, or do you want to like do you guys want to dive into it more?
I say let's move on.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. I feel like I've been
Yes.
reading these same chapters for months now.
Move on to
Like
3A.
I just keep
It's
revisiting
already
them
going
and
to take us
forgetting about
several
them.
years to get through this book.
Right.
Yeah.
At the rate we're going.
Yeah.
All right, sweet. So 3A, love is the fulfilling of the law.
Yeah, 3A
So that's
to... Gosh, 3A is long.
that's a long one. Yeah.
Oh man, maybe we should do half of 3A.
Or maybe
oh no, we're
just...
going every 2 months. I forgot.
Yeah, we could do.
We could probably do.
We can do all of it. Yeah, because
Mm.
that's almost 40 pages. Like
Yeah, where's
37 pages.
3B?
3B is shorter.
Oh, there it is.
136.
Oh, Jesus.
Unless
3B is.
what do we got? 50 pages. What do you guys think?
Honestly, I say we
In
just
2 months.
go for it. Yeah, in 2 months,
Yeah.
I think we can do 50
We can do
pages.
that.
Sweet. Okay. So go through 3. Yeah. 3A and B.
All right.
Perfect.
Cool.
It's a
All
plan.
right.
Well, this is great.
Perfect.
Thanks for staying up late for this, Brian.
Yeah, no, man, of course. I wasn't going to miss it. I waited 2 months for this. I'm almost glad that I misunderstood the way time works across, time zones, because I thought I was going to get it here like an hour late and only have like maybe 40 minutes and have to come in the middle. So like, honestly, I think this was the better of those two possibilities.
Yeah, philosophy major, not a math major.
Yeah, no, there's a
Right.
reason I stayed away from numbers. There's a reason that I only got as far as the syllogism in logic. It very quickly becomes a sort of predicate calculus, and I didn't want to do calculus. Not of any kind. I don't care if they're predicates or numbers. I don't like calculus. Oh, man.
This is great. Awesome,
All
man.
right.
Well, you get
Yeah,
some good
we'll be in
rest.
touch.
All right.
We'll see you in a couple months.
All right. See you guys.
See ya.
Yeah.